Welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Deep within the misty hedges of Windermere House lies a labyrinth, a place where whispers carry secrets of the past, and every turn could reveal a hidden truth, or a danger no one sees. Tonight, one guest vanishes, leaving only a golden bookmark as a clue. Follow Miss Marple as she uncovers a mystery that has slept for generations and waits for someone brave enough to find it. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Windermere House. The autumn sun had begun to fade behind the soft golden haze of the countryside when Miss Marple, sitting by the window of her St. Mary Mead cottage, received a most unexpected letter. The handwriting was elegant, flowing in loops of dark ink upon fine cream paper, instantly recognizable to her as that of Lady Eleanor Ashcroft, an old acquaintance from years gone by. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and read slowly, savouring every word. The letter invited her to Windermere House, a sprawling estate set near the misty shores of a lake in the northern counties. The reason was described as a literary society retreat, a week of quiet companionship among scholars, poets, and lovers of old manuscripts. Yet there was something peculiar in the way Lady Eleanor phrased her invitation. A line lingered in Miss Marple's mind. "I feel a restlessness here, dear Jane. The house has grown heavy with secrets, and I should feel safer with you nearby." Miss Marple folded the letter gently, a thoughtful expression upon her face. She had learned, through many years of quiet observation, that when people hinted at unease, there was almost always more hidden beneath the surface. Her natural curiosity, mixed with a kind heart, made it impossible to decline. Within days, she was seated upon a train bound northward, the countryside blurring past her window. Windermere House revealed itself at dusk, its ancient stone walls rising out of a rolling mist, ivy clinging tightly to the edges, as though the estate itself wished to conceal its age-old stories. The carriage that brought Miss Marple rattled up the gravel drive, its wheels crunching with a steady rhythm that seemed to echo against the house's grand façade. Inside, the entrance hall glowed with the warm flicker of chandeliers, yet the atmosphere was oddly muted. Servants moved quietly, almost anxiously, as if aware of something unspoken. Lady Eleanor greeted Miss Marple warmly, though her smile faltered at times, betraying a mind troubled by matters not yet confessed. Around the long dining table that evening, Miss Marple was introduced to the other guests. Lord Henry, a scholar with an obsessive passion for rare manuscripts. Mr. Alcott, a historian, polite yet stiff, with a shadow in his gaze. Clara, a poet whose voice trembled with nervous energy. Lady Eleanor herself, ever gracious, though her eyes wandered often toward the window, as though watching the gardens beyond. The conversation flowed politely, yet Miss Marple, with her gentle smile and quiet attentiveness, noticed small details others overlooked. The sudden silence when the Labyrinth Gardens were mentioned, the quick exchange of glances between Lord Henry and Mr. Alcott, and the way Lady Eleanor's hands clasped together, tight as though holding back some confession. When at last the party retired for the night, Miss Marple lingered by her bedroom window. Beyond the glass lay the estate's most unusual feature, the Labyrinth Garden, sprawling and mysterious, its tall hedges gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The villagers' tales said that those who walked its winding paths often dreamt strange dreams, as though the maze whispered secrets from another world. Miss Marple allowed herself a faint smile, though her eyes remained thoughtful. "How curious," she murmured softly, as the wind stirred the leaves of the labyrinth below. "Where there are secrets, there will surely be puzzles, and where there are puzzles, there is always truth to be found." She drew the curtains and prepared for rest, unaware that before the week was through, Windermere House would reveal a mystery buried deep within its forgotten dreams. Chapter 2. The Whispering Labyrinth. The following morning broke with a thin veil of mist curling low over the grounds of Windermere House. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and roses from the garden. Miss Marple, ever an early riser, found herself at the breakfast table before most of the guests, enjoying a cup of tea while her sharp eyes wandered across the landscape through the tall windows. Beyond the manicured lawns, the labyrinth garden stretched out like a green sea of hedges, winding and twisting with such intricacy that even from above it appeared endless. Its entrance, a wrought iron archway entwined with ivy, seemed at once inviting and forbidding. Soon the other guests gathered. Lord Henry was already leafing through his notes, muttering something about hidden manuscripts and family secrets. Mr. Alcott spoke of history with great seriousness, yet avoided every mention of the labyrinth. Clara, the poet, looked dreamy and distracted, scribbling odd lines of verse onto the back of her napkin. Lady Eleanor, though gracious, showed a weariness in her smile, as though she carried a burden only she could feel. It was Lady Eleanor who finally suggested a morning walk. "Perhaps," she said gently, "our society might appreciate an exploration of the labyrinth. After all, Windermere is known for little else." There was a quiet hesitation around the table. Clara clasped her notebook tightly, as if the idea both thrilled and frightened her. Lord Henry's eyes lit up, but Mr. Alcott gave a tight nod, his jaw set firmly. Miss Marple, folding her napkin with neat precision, merely said, "How delightful. A garden always reveals more than one expects." The party set out after breakfast. The path toward the labyrinth was lined with marble statues, their faces worn by time, giving them an eerily watchful air. The iron archway creaked slightly as they stepped beneath it, the sound carrying strangely through the mist. Inside, the hedges towered above them, their branches dense and thick, muffling every sound. It was a peculiar silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional flutter of unseen birds. The group wandered through the winding paths, each turn revealing yet another corridor of green. Clara paused suddenly, her pale face turning even whiter. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The others stopped, listening. At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, like a sigh carried by the wind, there came a whisper, soft, indistinct, almost like words half forgotten. Lord Henry laughed nervously. The wind through the hedges, nothing more. Yet his voice shook slightly, betraying unease. Miss Marple, however, tilted her head with quiet attentiveness. She had lived long enough to know the difference between mere fancy and the weight of truth. The whispering was not the random sigh of air. It was patterned, timed, purposeful. She bent to examine the gravel at her feet. There, almost overlooked, were two sets of footprints, one fresh, leading deeper into the labyrinth, the other, older, returning out again, but they did not match the size or stride of any among the present guests. Straightening, Miss Marple's eyes flickered with calm thought. "The labyrinth," she said softly, as though speaking to herself, "is never so mysterious as those who walk it." Lady Eleanor quickly suggested they turn back, and the group, eager to be free of the oppressive silence, agreed. As they emerged once more into the open air, Clara pressed her hand to her temple. "It was a voice," she insisted. "I heard it clearly. It called my name." The others dismissed her words, but Miss Marple, with her serene composure, merely nodded. She said nothing of the footprints she had seen, keeping that observation quietly to herself. For in her heart, she knew. The labyrinth was not merely a garden. It was the stage upon which secrets would soon demand to be uncovered. and as the mist thickened around Windermere House, Miss Marple felt the first threads of mystery weaving themselves into a puzzle only patience and clarity could resolve. Chapter 3. A sudden disappearance. The day after their uneasy walk through the labyrinth dawned grey and chill, a fine mist clinging to the grounds of Windermere House. The guests gathered once more in the dining room, where silver pots of steaming tea and platters of toast awaited them. The tall windows overlooked the sprawling gardens, but this morning, even the sunshine seemed reluctant to break through the heavy clouds. Miss Marple took her usual place at the far end of the table, knitting needles in hand, her soft gaze moving gently across the room. She was a quiet presence, yet nothing escaped her notice. Lady Eleanor poured coffee with a steady hand, though her face betrayed tiredness. Clara scribbled distractedly into her notebook, murmuring a line of verse under her breath. Mr. Alcott unfolded the newspaper, though his eyes seemed far away. And Lord Henry? He was not there. At first, no one commented. Guests at large country houses were often late for breakfast, preferring a morning walk or a few more hours of rest. But as the minutes passed, Lady Eleanor frowned. "It is unlike Lord Henry to be absent," she said softly. "He keeps the strictest of schedules." A footman was sent to his chambers. He returned shortly, his expression troubled. "His bed was not slept in, my lady. His belongings are still in place. There is no sign of him." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Clara's hand trembled as she set down her teacup. Mr. Alcott gave a gruff cough and muttered something about, no doubt, a solitary walk. Yet his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch. She looked up, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "Did he, by chance, mention last evening where he intended to go?" she asked gently. Lady Eleanor shook her head, worry creasing her brow. He seemed distracted, but he said nothing. Only that he wished to review his notes once more before bed. A search was quickly organized. Servants spread through the house while the guests, uneasy but obedient, scoured the grounds. It was Miss Marple who suggested they look first near the labyrinth. The morning air was damp, carrying with it the faint smell of rain-soaked earth. As they approached the ivy-covered archway, Miss Marple's eyes caught a glimmer of something on the gravel path. She bent slowly, lifting the object with delicate care. It was a golden bookmark, finely engraved with strange designs, as though belonging to some rare manuscript. On its surface, faint smudges of ink stained the edges. "Curious," she murmured. "This is no trinket dropped by accident. It feels rather like a clue left behind." The others gathered close, their faces pale. Clara clutched her notebook to her chest, whispering, "It looks almost like a message." Miss Marple glanced toward the entrance of the labyrinth, its tall hedges looming silently in the mist. "Perhaps," she said softly, "the whispers we heard yesterday were not merely fancy. Something, or someone, is hidden within these walls." The group hesitated. Lady Eleanor's face grew ashen, though she tried to compose herself. "Surely, Jane, you do not mean—" But Miss Marple did not answer at once. She studied the gravel path once more, noticing the same overlapping footprints she had seen the day before, one set fresh, pressed firmly into the damp earth, leading inward, another, faint and older, leading outward. Yet again, the stride did not match any of her companions. Straightening, she placed the bookmark gently into her handbag. Her voice was calm, but her words carried a quiet weight. "Lord Henry has not vanished into thin air. The labyrinth is a place of secrets, and it seems one of those secrets has claimed him." The hedges swayed slightly as the wind passed through them, the faint rustle sounding uncannily like whispers. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, while Miss Marple, serene as ever, looked on. For she knew the heart of the puzzle was only just beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 4. Puzzles in the Library. The rain had come by mid-afternoon, soft and persistent, wrapping Windermere House in a curtain of silver mist. The atmosphere was heavy, as though the very walls absorbed the unease of Lord Henry's disappearance. Servants moved with hushed voices. Guests spoke little over tea. But Miss Marple, with her knitting laid aside, felt that silence was often the most eloquent companion. It left room for truth to slip through the cracks. When Lady Eleanor suggested they retire to the library to distract themselves with books, Miss Marple quietly agreed. Yet she knew well that libraries in such houses seldom offered only distraction. They were repositories of family secrets, if one knew where to look. The Windermere Library was a vast chamber of oak-panelled walls, lined from floor to ceiling with books that smelled of dust, parchment and time. A fire burned low in the hearth, though it offered little warmth against the chill of unease. Heavy drapes shut out the storm beyond the windows. The guests wandered half-heartedly among the shelves, Clara tracing spines of poetry, Mr. Alcott studying the local histories with too much intensity, Lady Eleanor pacing the carpet as though her thoughts weighed heavier than volumes of books. Miss Marple, however, allowed her eyes to settle on the desk near the window. Upon it lay Lord Henry's belongings, a leather satchel half open, several manuscripts stacked neatly, and, tucked beneath a scattering of papers, a slim notebook bound in worn brown leather. She approached with gentle curiosity. "I wonder," she said softly, as though to no one in particular, "whether our dear Lord Henry left us some small clue as to his preoccupations." Lady Eleanor hesitated, torn between propriety and desperation, then nodded. "Yes, Jane. Please, if it might tell us something." Miss Marple opened the notebook carefully. Inside were pages of cryptic sketches of the Labyrinth, its passages drawn in overlapping circles and lines, annotated with notes in Lord Henry's hand. Certain areas were marked with symbols, stars, arrows, and curious words like Chamber of Forgotten Dreams. Turning the pages, Miss Marple's keen eye caught something unusual. The ink on several passages was fresh, too fresh, written only the night before. The words read, "Voices from the hedge, a hidden chamber beneath the third arch. Eleanor must never know until I am certain." Miss Marple's fingers lingered on that line. Eleanor must never know. A protective instinct, or a fear of what she might do if she discovered the truth. Meanwhile, Clara had drifted closer, her eyes wide. "How romantic," she whispered. "A hidden chamber, a labyrinth full of dreams. It sounds like something out of a legend." But Miss Marple, with her calm wisdom, knew legends often cloaked darker truths. She tucked the notebook back into the satchel with quiet care, her face serene, though her mind worked swiftly. She glanced at Mr. Alcott, who had been watching her too closely. His eyes darted away the moment hers met his. Clara hummed to herself nervously, scribbling a half-poem about dreams and whispers. Lady Eleanor, standing by the fire, seemed lost in her own thoughts, though the slight tightening of her lips suggested she suspected more than she admitted. Miss Marple smoothed her skirt and spoke with gentle firmness. "It seems, my friends, that the labyrinth is not merely a curiosity of gardening. It conceals something far older, and Lord Henry believed he had come close to its heart. The question is not only where he has gone, but what it was he hoped to find." A gust of wind rattled the windows just then, making the fire sputter. For a brief moment, the room seemed to darken, and all eyes flickered toward the storm outside. The rain fell harder, drumming against the panes like restless fingers. Miss Marple folded her hands serenely. "Puzzles," she murmured, almost to herself, "are rather like gardens. You must follow the right path, step by step, until you arrive at the truth. And sometimes, the path begins with the smallest, most overlooked clue. Her gaze rested once more on the golden bookmark she had discovered, now resting quietly in her handbag. Between the bookmark and the cryptic diary, a pattern was forming. A puzzle was unfolding, one that only patience and observation could untangle, and Miss Marple, in her quiet, soothing way, was determined to follow it wherever it led. Chapter 5. Secrets of the Guests. The storm lingered through the night, its steady rain whispering against the windows of Windermere House, as though the labyrinth itself had found a voice. By morning, the air inside the great hall was heavy, the guests subdued. Breakfast was a silent affair. China cups clinked softly, toast went untouched, and each person seemed burdened with thoughts they dared not share. Miss Marple, ever the quiet observer, sipped her tea with serene patience. To the casual eye she looked like a harmless old lady, but behind her gentle gaze she was watching, listening, and gathering fragments of truth. People revealed more in their silences than in their words, and Windermere House was brimming with both. After breakfast, she chose her moment. With her knitting bag on her arm, she drifted toward the drawing room where the guests had gathered. She did not interrogate them. Oh no, that was never her way. Instead, she began with the mildest of questions, framed in her kindly, unassuming tone. "Such dreadful weather for a walk," she remarked lightly. "I suppose, Clara, you find such days inspiring for your poetry?" Clara looked up, startled. Her cheeks flushed as though she'd been caught in some secret thought. Yes, though I admit, my verses have been troubled of late. The labyrinth unsettled me, Miss Marple. I thought I heard my name whispered there. It reminded me of dreams I once had, strange, recurring dreams, almost as if the maze knew me. She stopped abruptly, realizing she had said too much. Miss Marple only smiled gently and nodded, letting silence do its work. Clara quickly bent her head back to her notebook, scribbling nervously. Later, Miss Marple found herself near Mr. Alcott, who was carefully polishing his spectacles. In her deceptively innocent way, she said, "Historians must find places like Windermere House fascinating. So much of the past still lingering in these old stones." Mr. Alcott stiffened. "The past is best left where it belongs, madam. Digging it up only leads to trouble." "Ah," Miss Marple replied softly. "But sometimes the past insists upon being found, especially when it has been deliberately hidden." For just a moment his hands faltered, the cloth pausing mid-polish. His eyes flickered toward her, sharp and wary, before he muttered something about the weather and walked away. It was in the afternoon that Lady Eleanor finally sought Miss Marple's company privately. In the quiet of the small morning room, Eleanor's composure slipped. She wrung her hands together, her voice trembling. "Jane, I fear there is more to Henry's disappearance than we admit. The labyrinth has always carried whispers in this family. There are tales of secret chambers beneath its hedges, chambers built to hide, documents, evidence of scandals long past. My grandfather spoke of them once, but I never dared believe." Miss Marple laid a comforting hand upon her friend's wrist. "My dear Eleanor, truth has a way of surfacing whether we invite it or not. The question is not if it will come, but how we shall face it when it does." Lady Eleanor looked into Miss Marple's calm eyes and felt some measure of steadiness return to her heart. That evening, as lamps glowed softly against the storm-darkened sky, Miss Marple sat alone in the drawing room. She pieced together what she had observed. Clara's dreams and nervous confessions tied her emotionally to the labyrinth. Mr. Alcott's rigid insistence that the past remain buried suggested a deeper, more personal connection to Windermere's secrets. Lady Eleanor's fear confirmed that the labyrinth was no mere curiosity. It was a vault of history, of truths others might prefer remained forgotten. Miss Marple's expression remained placid, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap. Yet within her mind, the puzzle pieces were slowly aligning. Outside, the rain ceased, and the wind carried a soft sigh through the hedges. The labyrinth waited, silent but watchful, as though it knew the game had begun in earnest. Chapter 6. The Night of the Shattered Lantern. The storm returned with a vengeance that evening, a wild orchestra of rain and wind lashing against the old stones of Windermere House. The great corridors echoed with the groans of timbers and the rattling of shutters. The guests, already uneasy, seemed to shrink into themselves as the storm howled outside. Lamps flickered, casting long shadows on the panelled walls, while the fire sputtered in protest against the damp air. Miss Marple, seated serenely in the drawing-room, appeared the picture of calm with her knitting spread neatly across her lap. Yet her ears were keen, her eyes alert. She knew well that storms had a curious way of stirring more than weather. They unsettled the human heart and loosened lips and actions best kept in control. As the hour drew late, Lady Eleanor suggested everyone retire, but restlessness clung to the house. Clara, pale and distracted, insisted on a walk along the gallery to quiet her thoughts. Mr. Alcott retreated to the library, muttering of work, though his stiff posture betrayed something else. Lady Eleanor herself lingered by the window, staring out into the rain-washed darkness of the gardens. It was Miss Marple who noticed it first, a faint glow flickering in the distance beyond the glass, wavering in the wind like a small star swallowed by mist. It was coming from the labyrinth. "A lantern," she said quietly. Lady Eleanor turned sharply. "But no one is permitted to wander there at night." Miss Marple rose slowly, gathering her shawl around her shoulders. "Perhaps no one is permitted, my dear, but it seems someone has chosen otherwise." A small search party was quickly formed. Miss Marple, Lady Eleanor, Clara, and, reluctantly, Mr. Alcott. With cloaks pulled tightly against the rain, they made their way down the slick gravel path. The storm roared overhead, the wind tugging at their garments, the rain seeping into their shoes. At the labyrinth's entrance, the glow had vanished. Only the storm's howl greeted them. Yet as they pressed cautiously inside, the narrow, hedged paths seemed alive, the rustling leaves whispering secrets to one another. It was Clara who gave a sharp cry. There, at a fork in the path, lay the shattered remains of a lantern. The glass was broken, its metal frame bent, as if it had been smashed deliberately against the stones. The wick still smouldered faintly, sending up a curl of smoke that stung the air. Lady Eleanor clutched her cloak tighter. "An accident," she whispered. Miss Marple knelt carefully beside the fragments. Her hand hovered over the glass, noting the pattern of the shards. They were not scattered at random. No, they were arranged almost purposefully, aligned in a way that suggested intention rather than chaos. A signal, a message. She straightened, her expression calm but thoughtful. This was no mere accident. Whoever carried this lantern wanted us to find it. Lord Henry. "Perhaps, or another who wishes to be noticed." Mr. Alcott's voice broke through, harsh and defensive. "Nonsense. Some servant left it behind. Nothing more." His words were too quick, too sharp, as though aimed more at silencing himself than the others. Clara's eyes were wide, her voice trembling. But why here? Why in the very heart of the labyrinth? Miss Marple said nothing at first. She let the rain and wind fill the silence, the labyrinth's whispered breath weaving around them. Then, in her soft, measured tone, she replied, "Because, my dear, the heart of a maze is where truth lies waiting. And truth, like light, will always find its way to the surface, no matter how often men try to shatter it." They returned to the house, wet and weary, the image of the broken lantern lingering in their minds. Sleep came uneasily, for each guest wondered what the labyrinth concealed, and why it demanded their attention so insistently. As for Miss Marple, she sat by her candle a little longer, knitting set aside, her thoughts winding quietly through the puzzle. Someone within Windermere was playing a careful game. The labyrinth was not merely a garden, but a stage, and the broken lantern was the first act in a performance that was far from over. Chapter 7. The Chamber of Forgotten Dreams. The storm broke with dawn, leaving behind a world washed clean and pale under the grey light of morning. The hedges of the labyrinth glistened with raindrops, each leaf heavy with water, the air still carrying the damp fragrance of earth and roses. Windermere House itself seemed weary, its ancient stones holding the weight of secrets that could no longer remain silent. Miss Marple, having slept but little, rose early. She moved with her usual gentle calm, though her eyes carried the spark of determination. The broken lantern had not been a meaningless accident. It had been a sign, an urgent beckoning toward the heart of the labyrinth. At breakfast, the guests were subdued. Clara's hands trembled as she buttered her toast, her notebook lying unopened beside her plate. Mr. Alcott appeared restless, his gaze darting toward the windows and away again, as though dreading what lay outside. Lady Eleanor tried to maintain composure, but her voice faltered when she spoke. It was Miss Marple who finally set down her teacup and said in her soft but certain way, "Today, my friends, we must go to the labyrinth again, but not to wander its paths aimlessly. We must follow the clues Lord Henry left for us." No one argued. The air in the room was heavy with inevitability. By mid-morning, the small group stood once more before the ivy-covered arch. The rain had ceased, but a faint mist lingered among the hedges, curling around their edges like living breath. Miss Marple walked first, her step steady, her sharp eyes scanning the ground. She recalled the words written in Lord Henry's diary, "Beneath the third arch." It took some time, turn after turn, path after path, but at last they came upon it, a narrow archway formed by two hedges grown close together. Unlike the others, its entrance was partially hidden by a cluster of ivy, and at its base, almost concealed by wet leaves, lay a small stone slab. Miss Marple stooped, brushing away the foliage with her gloved hand. Beneath, faint carvings were revealed, symbols of stars and circles, the same as in Lord Henry's sketches. She tapped the slab lightly with her umbrella, and it gave a hollow echo. "There," she said softly, "a passage below." Together, with much effort, they lifted the stone slab. Beneath it yawned a dark opening, a staircase of damp stone descending into shadow. Clara gave a stifled gasp. Lady Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. Mr. Alcott muttered something about foolishness, but did not step back. Miss Marple, calm as ever, produced a candle from her handbag. She had thought to bring it just in case, and lit it carefully. The small flame glowed, steady and warm, a fragile light against the darkness below. "Come," she said gently. "The truth will not wait." The staircase led them into a hidden chamber beneath the labyrinth. The air was cool and thick with the smell of damp stone and forgotten years. The candlelight revealed shelves carved into the walls, filled with old manuscripts, boxes of letters, and faded portraits shrouded in dust. At the centre of the chamber, on a wooden chair, sat Lord Henry, his wrists bound with rope, his eyes wide but alive. He struggled to his feet at the sight of them. "Thank heavens," he cried hoarsely. "I feared I would not last another night." Lady Eleanor rushed forward, her face pale with relief, while Clara let out a trembling sob. Mr. Alcott stood rigid, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple moved forward calmly, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. The relics around them were more than forgotten family heirlooms. They were the concealed truths of Windermere's past. Letters of scandal, documents of inheritance disputes, evidence of betrayals long buried. Lord Henry's voice shook as he explained, "I followed the clues in the diary and found this chamber. But before I could leave, I was struck from behind. I never saw who it was. They wanted me silenced until they could decide what to do." Miss Marple laid a steady hand upon his arm. "Hush now. You are safe, but the puzzle is not yet complete. Whoever placed you here is among us still." The candle flickered as if in warning, shadows leaping along the walls. The chamber seemed to breathe with the weight of its secrets, every manuscript and relic a silent witness to truths men had tried to hide. Miss Marple's calm voice filled the stillness. "The labyrinth has yielded its heart, but in doing so it has also unmasked the heart of human weakness. Now we must listen carefully, for within these walls the whispers of the past will tell us who among us sought to keep them buried." Chapter 8. The Unmasking of the Betrayer. The chamber beneath the labyrinth seemed to hold its breath. The candlelight flickered across damp stone walls and the piles of relics that time had nearly swallowed. Lord Henry, weary but alive, rubbed his wrists as Lady Eleanor and Clara fussed over him. Mr. Alcott lingered near the shelves, his eyes darting nervously over the manuscripts, as if they might spring to life and accuse him. Miss Marple stood in the centre, her small figure calm and unshaken, her hands folded neatly before her. She spoke softly, but her voice carried in the silence, firm as the ticking of a clock. "Secrets, you see," she began, "are very much like weeds in a garden. They can be cut back, even buried, but they always find a way to return. Windermere House has been tending a secret for many years, and last night it broke the surface." Lord Henry, still pale, lifted his chin. "I found documents here, scandalous records. They spoke of disputed inheritances, affairs concealed, even forgery in the Ashcroft line, history that would tarnish the family name. I wished to share them at the retreat, but someone feared exposure more than truth." Clara gasped, clutching her notebook tighter. Lady Eleanor bowed her head in shame, though her eyes shone with pain rather than guilt. "I suspected such things existed," she whispered, "but I never dreamed. This." Miss Marple's eyes moved from face to face, lingering at last upon Mr. Alcott. He shifted uneasily, avoiding her gaze. "It is rather curious," she said gently, "that the diary spoke of the third arch, and that you, Mr. Alcott, seemed determined to dismiss any talk of the labyrinth or the past." Too determined, one might say. Alcott cleared his throat sharply. "Pure nonsense, madam. I had no hand in Henry's misfortune. I was in the library." Miss Marple's knitting needle voice interrupted softly. "Indeed. But who else knew of the labyrinth's secrets? Who else had access to the family histories, the old records, the forgotten scandals? A historian, and one with personal ties to the Ashcroft family tree. You feared, sir, that Henry would expose truths that might soil your own heritage." Alcott's composure cracked. His eyes flashed. "Those lies should have remained buried. Do you not see? To reveal them now would ruin generations of respectability. I meant only to frighten him, to buy myself time. I never wished for harm." The candle sputtered, throwing shadows across his face. Clara shrank back. Lady Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her lips, and Lord Henry's jaw tightened with indignation. Miss Marple, however, remained tranquil, her tone steady and almost soothing. "Ah, but that is how it always begins, Mr. Alcott. A little deception to keep the truth at bay, yet deception grows heavy. It consumes those who wield it. You struck Henry down, hid him in this chamber, and left the lantern as a puzzle, thinking yourself clever. But puzzles, once begun, cannot be half solved. They always lead to the truth." Mr. Alcott sagged against the cold wall, the weight of his actions pressing down upon him. Rainwater dripped faintly from the stones above, each drop echoing in the silence like a slow tolling bell. "Yes," he admitted at last, his voice broken. "I did it. I only wanted time to find the letters and destroy them before anyone could see. My family's honor, my life's work. It would all be ashes if the world knew." Miss Marple inclined her head, not with triumph but with quiet sadness. "The world is seldom as harsh as we fear, sir. And truth, though it may wound, is always gentler than a lie that festers." They ascended from the chamber in silence, the mist curling once more around the hedges as though the labyrinth itself exhaled relief. The storm had passed, but the air remained heavy with revelation. In the drawing room of Windermere House, Mr. Alcott sat pale and defeated as Lady Eleanor sent for the authorities. Clara wrote no verses, her pen lying still at last. Lord Henry held the golden bookmark in his hand, a symbol now not of mystery, but of survival. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the quiet click of her needles filling the hush. Her face was serene, but her eyes, sharp as ever, saw the lesson clearly. "The maze," she murmured, "was never in the garden. It was here, in the hearts of men, and like all labyrinths once entered, there is no escaping until the centre, the truth, is found." Chapter 9. Justice in the Drawing Room. The rain had washed the night clean, and by morning the world outside Windermere House lay hushed and damp, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Yet inside, the atmosphere remained charged with unease. The guests assembled in the great drawing room, where the fire crackled low, shadows flickering across the carved oak walls. Mr. Alcott sat stiffly in one of the high-backed chairs, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly upon his knees. The weight of his confession clung to him, though he now tried to compose himself with the dignity of a man who had lost more than he could ever hope to recover. Lord Henry, his wrists still sore from the ropes, stood by the mantelpiece, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Clara huddled close to the fire, notebook forgotten in her lap, her wide eyes darting between the faces around her. Lady Eleanor stood at the window, one hand resting lightly on the curtain, her posture tall but her eyes haunted. And in the centre, calm and composed, sat Miss Marple, knitting needles moving softly, her presence as steady as a clock ticking away the seconds. When Scotland Yard's inspector arrived, summoned discreetly by Lady Eleanor in the early hours, he found the guests already subdued, the mystery unravelled by the unlikeliest detective. He listened carefully as Miss Marple, in her gentle and precise manner, laid out the chain of events. She spoke without accusation, her voice low and soothing, yet each detail was woven together as neatly as her knitting. Lord Henry's diary and his discovery of the labyrinth's chamber. The golden bookmark, placed deliberately to draw attention. The shattered lantern, arranged as a signal rather than an accident. And finally, Mr. Alcott's fierce resistance to any probing of the past, betraying his fear before ever a word was spoken. Each piece fit together, and the inspector, though accustomed to sterner speeches, nodded with quiet respect. Mr. Alcott lowered his head at last. "I did not mean true harm," he said hoarsely. "I only sought to protect what was left of my family's name. I thought if I silenced Henry for a night, frightened him, I might have time to destroy the evidence in that chamber. But I underestimated her.
glanced toward Miss Marple with a mixture of bitterness and reluctant admiration. Miss Marple's knitting paused. She looked at him with a kind of sadness, her eyes soft yet unwavering. "You see, Mr. Alcott, it is not in the nature of secrets to remain hidden. They grow restless, like weeds under stone, and those who cling too tightly to them only find themselves ensnared." Her words, spoken without judgment, carried the weight of truth more heavily than any scolding could. The inspector rose, placing a firm hand on Alcott's shoulder. "You'll come with me, sir." "There are charges enough to consider." Alcott stood shakily, his dignity crumbling under the reality of justice. As he was
Led from the room, Clara let out a trembling sigh of relief, and Lord Henry exhaled sharply, as though freed not only from ropes but from a nightmare itself. Lady Eleanor turned to Miss Marple, her voice breaking with gratitude. "Jane, without you, I dread to think what might have become of us. You've not only uncovered the truth, but you've saved us from shadows that have lingered far too long." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles resuming their quiet rhythm. "My dear Eleanor, it was not I who saved you. It was truth itself. One only had to listen carefully for its whisper." The drawing room fell into a gentle stillness. The fire popped softly, the rain eased to a mist outside, and for the first time in days, Windermere House seemed to breathe again, its secrets no longer festering beneath the surface, but released into the open air. And Miss Marple, modest as ever, returned to her knitting, content to let others marvel at her work while she, with calm simplicity, saw only the natural course of human nature. Chapter 10. Miss Marple's Reflection. The final morning at Windermere House dawned soft and still. The storm had long passed, leaving the estate wrapped in a delicate veil of mist, the hedges glistening with lingering droplets, and the garden paths serene beneath the pale light of early day. A quiet peace seemed to settle over the house, as if it were finally exhaling after days of restless secrets. Miss Marple sat in the rose garden, a woolen shawl around her shoulders, her knitting resting lightly in her lap. The scent of damp earth, roses, and the faint tang of rain filled the air. Her eyes traced the hedges of the labyrinth, now silent and orderly, a green maze that had once whispered secrets in the wind. She reflected upon the events of the past week. Lord Henry, now safe and restored, had emerged from the hidden chamber, carrying with him not only documents of the past, but a renewed appreciation for the value of truth. Clara, the poet, had stopped scribbling frantic lines, now quiet, absorbing the weight of reality mingled with wonder. Lady Eleanor, though still bearing the traces of worry, held herself taller, her mind unburdened at last by the revelations that had loomed so ominously. Even Mr. Alcott, led away by the inspector, had learned that deceit, even when intended to protect, can entangle the best of intentions and lead to consequences that are inescapable. Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile, serene and knowing. She always found that human nature, much like a labyrinth, held twists and turns, dead ends and hidden chambers. One only needed patience, careful observation, and gentle logic to navigate it. Her gaze drifted across the garden paths, following the curves and hidden passages of the labyrinth. Each hedge, each twist, seemed now to mirror the hearts of those who had wandered within it. Secrets had been revealed, truths had been spoken, and the balance restored. The golden bookmark, the shattered lantern, the cryptic diary, they were not mere objects, but markers along the path that led from fear to understanding. And Miss Marple, in her quiet and unassuming way, had guided that journey, allowing the truth to surface naturally, without anger or haste. She rose slowly, her knitting needles tucked away, and walked to the far end of the garden where the sunlight began to touch the tips of the hedges. The labyrinth, though complex and winding, was no longer threatening. It had done its work. It had revealed, tested, and allowed justice to take its course. Miss Marple's thoughts turned inward. "Every family," she murmured softly, "every heart carries hidden corners. Some we see, some remain in shadow. But patience, observation, and kindness, these are the lanterns that reveal the truth gently, without harm." With a final glance at the labyrinth, she turned back toward the house. The mystery was resolved, the danger past, and the air seemed lighter, as though the estate itself acknowledged the balance restored. The soft click of her shoes on the stone path echoed in the still morning, a gentle rhythm marking the end of a chapter in the life of Windermere House. Miss Marple left the estate with her usual quiet grace, carrying not only the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, but the timeless understanding of human nature. That every maze, whether of hedges, hearts, or secrets, can be navigated with care, observation, and patience. And as she disappeared along the winding road, the labyrinth remained behind, serene and silent, ready to whisper its stories only to those who listened with gentle attentiveness.